So when we think about Stephen Hawking and what he intends in his book, The Grand Design, we have to remember that he has a purpose in mind, and that's the reason, obviously, for the title, The Grand Design, because his purpose is sort of lure you in with the little worm of the title, and then hook you and then reel you in and eat you by telling you there is no grand designer. All right? There is no grand designer. That's the purpose of his book. So it is an apologetics for atheism in scientific language and ideas. Now, what's interesting with regard to Stephen Hawking himself and this book is that as he goes through the history of human scientific thought and physics, really, because that is his specialty. Remember, his specialty is black holes as a physicist. It's important to think about what he rejects more than what he's accepting. All right? It's important to think about what he rejects rather than what he's accepting. Okay? Because that's the purpose of the initial discussion of the history of physics. All right? What he cuts off, what he leaves by the wayside. And for this reason, he brings in the classical physicists, all right? The classical physicists. And we're thinking now about the late 1500s all the way basically into the middle 1700s, okay? So this is quite a long period of time. All right, so we're thinking about from, say, 1580 to 1740, okay? 160 years, the time of the classical physicists. And we find that for Stephen Hawking, these men are simply useful for him, but ultimately he's going to reject classical physics completely as an explanation of reality. Okay? In his drive to dismiss the idea of God, he is going to dismiss classical physics, the findings, the whole enterprise of classical physics. Now, why does he reject it? For two reasons. Number one, because all the classical physicists believed in God. Okay? Oh, okay. Well, number two, because all the classical physicists believed in an objective world and an objective single universe. That's why he's going to reject classical physics, all right? Because they believed, first of all, that there was a God behind it all, making it all, and secondly, that there's an objective world at all. Okay, let's start, all right? Let's start with Copernicus, just for the fun of it, okay? Just to get to the beginning. Okay, Copernicus, big anti-establishment, anti-Catholic, revolutionary, right? Wrong. All right? Wrong. Totally wrong. Well, didn't Copernicus say and produce a text called De Revolutionibus, okay, on the revolutions of the heavenly bodies? Didn't he say in that book, which changed the world, okay, that it was the sun that was at the center of the universe rather than the earth? Okay, didn't he say that the sun was at the center of the universe rather than the earth? And didn't that, wasn't that just thrown in the face of the church and the believing world? And we're on our way. We're marching towards the world of Stephen Hawking, right? Wrong. Wrong. First of all, why did he write the book in the first place? First of all, why did Copernicus start this whole new age of modern classical physics by putting forward the theory of heliocentrism? Okay, heliocentrism. The sun is at the center of the universe. Not just the solar system, he said, but the universe. Okay? Why did he put forward that theory? Because he was commissioned by the Pope. Copernicus himself was, there's a controversy whether he was German or Polish, all right? That's an ongoing, depending on which ethnic group you're in. But obviously he was Polish. So, duh. So, he was commissioned by the Pope because he was a great mathematician. He was also had minor orders. All right, he was a canon of a church also. And he was commissioned to work out the proper date for Easter. All right, he was commissioned by the Pope. That's how it all started. That's how modern physics started, was that Copernicus was commissioned by the Pope to work out the proper day of Easter. Okay? For Easter. Because it has to do with the phases of the moon, right? That's when you fix Easter. And according to the old Ptolemaic, Aristotelian view of the universe, all right, things weren't matching up between what they observed in the heavens and what was supposed to happen, all right? So there was confusion as to the proper date. So Copernicus is going to work it out. He's going to solve the problems of Aristotle's cosmology. But he's a mathematician. And he says, well, listen, things work out much more beautifully. Actually, he says that. Things have much more mathematical simplicity to them, the universe, and they're much more mathematically beautiful. I don't know what mathematically beautiful looks like, but that's what he wants. I guess for mathematicians, they get into this. And so it's more mathematically beautiful. If you put the sun in the center of the universe and have the earth rotate around the sun. Okay? So he did that. He explained that. And he put that in his book, De Revolutionibus, which was dedicated to the Pope that had commissioned him. Okay? Where is the anti-God movement towards atheism here? Okay? And by the, a big thing, and I'm going to come to it soon, is that Stephen Hawking insists that if you accept natural laws, you have to reject miracles outright as impossible. Okay? Well, what has been the greatest miracle other than the resurrection? Right? So, modern physics started, because of a belief in the resurrection. Okay? You see why he's going to have to reject them ultimately and get on to nice things in the 20th century. Okay? Or what he thinks is nice things. Okay, so Copernicus puts the sun in the center. Okay? And it doesn't actually work out any better, apparently. The plan, the scheme, and the observations didn't really work out better than the geocentric theory. But it was done. Okay? And that the conflict. And one thing here, and this is important to think about when you're dealing with the stuff that Hawking is throwing at you, because he is throwing them at you, he is throwing it at you, is to realize that for none of these great classical physicists, and we have to call them great, because they were, Galileo, Descartes, and Newton, what's important here is that none of them rejected God, and none of them thought that you had to either have natural law or God. In fact, they assumed that if you have law, you have to have a lawgiver. That's the assumption. Because it makes logical sense, it makes rational sense. They weren't rebelling against the idea of God. They weren't rebelling against, well, at least with Galileo, whose tomb I visited last summer. It's in Santa Croce in the Franciscan church in Florence. And Descartes, who died a very pious Catholic death in Stockholm after spending a few months in which he converted the Queen of Sweden to the Catholic faith. All right, meaning she had to abdicate and leave the country. Queen Christina is now buried in the crypt of, actually in St. Peter's itself. So these men had pious deaths, okay? So for none of these men was there any idea that they're revolting against the idea of God. For these two men, Galileo and Descartes, there's no idea of revolting against the church either. No. They're revolting against Aristotle, the teaching of Aristotle, which some had made an absolute, the physics of Aristotle, which some had made an absolute doctrine, or practically speaking, okay? They're revolting against Aristotle, a pagan philosopher, okay? So this is what is happening here. Let me just talk about each one individually for a few moments. First, Galileo. Galileo could not stand Aristotle. All right, he was an Italian who could not stand the Greek. Okay, he wanted to destroy Aristotle's cosmology. All right, his presentation of the universe. Okay, and everything that he does, whether it's to show that there is corruption in the celestial spheres, he pointed to the fact of he saw storms on the sun, going across the sun, which means there was change in the heavenly realm, okay? Which every Christian should say, so, right? Right? Or, that when this never happened, but it sort of illustrates what he's thinking. When you drop a ball from the Tower of Pisa, right? You drop a big ball and a little ball. They actually, against Aristotle's physics, they both hit the ground at the same time. Okay, so a Christian would say, so, right? Okay, well that's the world that he's rejecting. All right. However, in rejecting Aristotle, he also rejects, and he's known for this, he also rejects the ideas of formal and final causality. All right? Galileo, before Descartes, but both of them do this in sync, they reject formal and final causality because they're hyper-mathematicians. And formal and final causality don't fit into the mathematician's view of nature. All right? What's formal and final causality, just for 1 second? Formal causality, we're speaking about the form of things, like you're human, okay? I'm human. And it tells us, the form of the thing tells us what it is. What's the essence? Okay? What's the essence? As if it doesn't matter, all right? I hope that you don't fill the refectory with, little poodles and start reading the rule, okay, of St. Benedict to them, because guess what? Their form determines that they won't know what you're talking about, okay? You fill it with human beings. Okay? It seems obvious, but it's not. Yeah. It's so formal cause is important. The essence of things is important. Also the final cause. That we can look at nature and see how things are oriented and see what their purpose. Their purpose. We can analyze nature and understand the purpose of things. Of course, obviously, through our sensation, we can experience a world in which this is sort of obvious, right? The purpose of a dog. We just got a dog recently, and she's, her purpose. As soon as she gets outside and maybe I shouldn't be talking about this now, but gets outside, someone opens the door by mistake and she's off, all right? There's purpose built into nature that we can experience with our sensation and our experience of the world, okay? And so for humans also, we're directed towards a goal. We always experience how, because we're human, we're directed towards a goal. One of the things, we seek to understand the world around us, right? And we seek ultimately to know why all things exist. That's part of knowledge, seeking after the first cause. But see, that you can't mathematicize that. You can't measure that, right? You can't measure. What's in physics the difference between a human being and a dog? How does that? It doesn't matter what the thing is, you see? And it doesn't matter what the thing is for. For physics, for mathematics, doesn't matter. So the problem with these guys is that they said, well, we're interested in mathematics. We're interested in describing the world in a mathematical way through measurement. So we'll say that the world is simply that nature, not the whole world, that nature is simply that which can be measured. Okay? And so this whole world of essence and movement towards an end, and that's rejected, put aside, to the loss for humanity, for a loss for human understanding. But see, that's what they did. And that's what Stephen Hawking likes about them. Okay? That's what Stephen Hawking likes about them. That they got rid of the idea that there were essences in the world, that there was natures in the world, that things were essentially different from each other, because math doesn't care. And also, they got rid of the idea that by looking at nature, you can understand that it has a purpose. They got rid of that idea. Okay? That by looking at nature, you can understand that it has a purpose. And who can give something a purpose but someone who made it for a reason, namely God. Okay? Now listen, Descartes, he's got a problem, okay? He's a believer. And so how are you going to do that? How are you going to get rid of final causality and purpose from your analysis of nature, which he wants to do? Because he wants to get rid of Aristotle. So he's going to do it for a pious reason, or he's going to say he's doing it for a pious reason. How do you know, finite mind that you are, the ultimate purpose of God? Can you read God's mind? You see? He doesn't say that God doesn't have a purpose. He's just saying that we can't know the purpose, okay, by looking at nature. He's wrong, but that's what he says. So he's even bringing God in when he tries to dismiss the whole idea of final causality. Because who are you to know? Who are we creatures to know the purposes of God? Okay? So, all right. So even he brings in God even into his dismissal. And Galileo, similar thing. If the whole world, because this is what he's going to say. This is what Descartes and Galileo are going to say. That the only way you can understand the world around you is through math. Okay? The only way, what cues you in to the way things really are. Okay, focus on exactly what I say here. The only thing that cues you in to the way things actually are, actually, underline, because that's what they mean, is math. Math. Okay? Math allows man to do that. Hence, okay, well, all right. So how does God fit in here? Well, Galileo is going to call God the great geometer. All right? God is the great geometer. God is the great geometer. God uses the laws of mathematics to create the world. Notice, okay. Yeah, okay. God uses the laws of mathematics to create the world. So you have to, in order to understand God's creation, you have to look through geometry. Okay? You have to look through geometry in order to understand what the world is about and how it functions. But notice God's in there too. In fact, that's the critical thing. So by learning math, you really get into the very head of God himself. Galileo is perfectly fine with that. And Newton, who, what does Stephen Hawking say about Newton? This is what he says about Isaac Newton, who lived from 1643 to 1727. Stephen Hawking says about Newton, Newton was the person who won widespread acceptance of the modern concept of scientific law with his 3 laws of motion and his law of gravity. That's what he says about Newton. All right, so, okay, so he's talking positively about Newton. Okay. Well, Newton also poses, and he does the same thing. He rejects the idea that you can know formal and final causality because it's not mathematicizable, all right? You can't put it into mathematical formulas, what something is and why something is, okay? So he's the real founder. He's worshipped as the founder of modern physics, all right? You know, by the whole 1700s treat Newton as a god because he portrayed nature as it really is. Write that down too. Okay, so the 1700s, whether it's, you know, John Locke or, well, not John Locke, but the disciples of John Locke, like Thomas Jefferson, who has a bust of Newton in his house in Monticello, or, you know, Alexander Pope, the English poet, who said, God created Newton and all was light. No, it's a poem, yeah, he said that. That's how they viewed him. That's how they viewed Newton. But notice Newton, okay, well, all right, so Stephen Hawking, okay, you gotta say something good about Newton, right? I mean, he is, okay? So Newton portrays the world, but how does he portray the world? Does he get rid of God like you are, Stephen Hawking? No, not at all. Not at all. Quite the opposite. You can't really deeply understand Newton's physics unless you know his theology, if you will. Okay? Why? Because Newton, he's famous for saying that space and time are absolutes, that they are fixed, right? That they are singular, that they are given. And the way he presents that theory is he says that space and time were created by God first, before he created the universe. Okay? So space and time, says Newton, were created first by God. It's hard to conceptualize this. And then the universe was created and filled that space and time. He calls space and time, this is Newton, okay? He calls space and time the divine sensorium. The divine sensorium. It's that through which God looks at the world. Space and time are the sort of categories that he created in which God looks at the world. Okay? Sort of the lenses, if you will. So without this creation of space and time, there would be no world. And you couldn't understand it, because physics depends on space and time. The whole understanding of physics. So he brings in God here. He brings in God here. And it's just incredible when you see how Hawking uses this, because he wants to portray that human knowledge as progressively getting rid of the crazy idea of God. Okay, that's what he wants to do. Say, oh, it's for primitive people, and well, this is Galileo, Descartes, Newton. And just one thing about, so did Newton dismiss the idea of God? No, obviously. Did he wait a minute, okay. I got something now. Okay. All right, he's got a problem. Because stupidly enough, Newton thinks that God can go along with the laws of nature. He doesn't realize you can only have one or the other. Okay, he's dumb. No, if that's fundamental, if that's obvious, then he's dumb. And so are all these men. Okay? So are you. So am I. That's just fundamentally stupid. Can't you see the obvious dichotomy there? Well, okay. Okay. He's all Newton's nuts, and he's all figged out. But sorry. But surely he doesn't believe in miracles, right? Because that's another thing that I'm going to say, Stephen Hawking say, that if you have natural laws, you can't have miracles. If you have natural laws, that excludes the possibility of miracles or any kind of divine intervention in the world. Surely Newton must acknowledge this. He's living, 1740? They're already in big time into the Enlightenment. They're enlightened already. Well, guess what? Wrong. They have the writings of Isaac Newton, and actually Newton spent more time commenting on the prophecies of Daniel from the Bible than he's more time on that than working in physics, than writing about physics. He spent more time commenting on the prophecies in Daniel, the prophet Daniel, the different ages of the world and God's intervention, than working in the realm of physics. Obviously, if you're talking about prophecies, you're talking about how God is going to intervene in history, right? For his own purpose, which he packs into the world. If you're worried about prophecy, you're saying that there's purpose in the world that's packed in by God and unfolding, and where he's going to intervene. So, come on. Even Newton is beyond the pale for Stephen Hawking. Let's just be vicious, okay? However, that's not the biggest thing. It's not just, he's not going to go after Newton primarily because he believes in God and miracles and all those things. He's going to go after Newton and Galileo and Descartes for one thing: for believing that there's an objective universe whose laws are single, are definite, and whose laws can be known by man. So their problem is they believe in an objective universe. So we have to throw out classical physics. So so by throwing out God, you throw out an objective universe and its knowability. I think that's 1 for our side and 0 for Newton. 1 for our side and 0 for Stephen Hawking, but that's just my opinion. So, all right, thank you.